The whole story of the young lad began 3 days before the disaster. 3 days before the accident, the hero fought fire magic against a large bear in the forest. The guy was an F-rank hunter named Juris. Juris had defeated the bear and was not happy that it had stolen his prey. This beast was a D-rank mountain bear, but since the hero was a F-rank, he would not even be paid a penny for it. Not far away from the Juris and the bear, there were also some previously defeated goblins lying around. Apparently, the bear had blown their heads off with its huge paws and there was no way to get materials from such carcasses. But there was nothing to do, and the hero took a knife in his hands, deciding to collect whatever survived. After the Juris collected a bag of materials, he used fire magic and earth magic, thanks to which he got rid of the dead carcasses of enemies. Everything was according to the guild charter and the cleansing was completed. Juris sat down on a rock to rest, and it seemed to him that it was the most real hemorrhage, because in a dungeon the corpses would disappear by themselves. Just one of the dungeons was not far from him, and the hero looked in its direction. Before the city gates closed, he still had an hour, and the guy decided that it was not too late. With those words, the hero unloaded everything he needed to cook a meal and exclaimed that it was time for a refreshment. Juris couldn't find only the remaining ingredients in his backpack. He dove headfirst into his backpack and decided that he should put his magic bag in order. After a while, he finally found them. The guy boiled water and made soup with vegetables and meat. Before dinner, he wished himself a pleasant appetite and started eating. Juris was delighted with the deliciousness and noticed that he was beginning to get better and better at cooking. In that case, he didn't even have to be a hunter, as he could have gone to work part-time in restaurants, but the guy decided that was too much. The hero laughed and decided that he wasn't lonely at all, and after his words there was a silent long pause. Juris ate everything and thanked himself for the food. Now he had to pack everything up and go on his way, when suddenly he noticed some movement ahead. It was a dog that ran towards him and barked in greeting. The hero took the plate and told the dog that he was waiting for him. He left his friend his share and asked him to take his time. Juris gave a command to the dog and the dog crouched on the ground, wagging his tail madly and swallowing drool. Juris called him a good boy, after which he let his friend eat. The boy noticed the wound that was on the dog's back and thought that it was completely healed, though the fur would take a long time to grow back. But apparently the dog didn't care at all. It had been about a month since Juris had found this dog. At that time he had just finished hunting the magical beast. At that time, the dog came out of nowhere and was seriously injured. The hero immediately nursed him back to health and fed him. From then on, he began periodically stopping by for food. Juris smiled and apparently the dog was hooked on his cooking and was delighted with it. The rag he had used earlier to bandage his wound for whatever reason was around his neck. The hero decided that someone had bandaged it and told the dog that it looked good on him. Looking at the time, the hero noticed that his time was running out. He used cleaning magic, then put all the dishes back in his backpack and notified the dog that he had to go. He also left this plate with the dog and told him he could pick it up. The dog looked at the guy questioningly and the hero went over to pet him. He promised to come back and the dog barked happily in response. As the hero set off, he heard the name Jin and looked back at the dog, who again barked goodbye to him. The boy scratched his head and decided that he had imagined it. If he walked as usual, he would definitely not make it on time, and the jurist thought about what he should do. The hero used acceleration magic and decided that everything would be fine. Besides, it's pretty late now and no one will see it. Applying magic, the guy rushed forward at a breakneck speed. For some reason, under the influence of the spell, he could only run in a certain way, and there was a strange sound coming from him. Meanwhile, in the city of Lionner, a man named Greaves was ordered to close the gates, but the guard asked him to wait a little longer, for Juris had not yet returned. His partner remembered the biped again, and apparently not for the first time. Greaves and the jurist were obviously friends, and his partner asked him to tell him to learn to come back before sunset next time. It was getting dark and the jurist appeared on the horizon and apologized to Greaves for his tardiness. Greaves' guard asked him not to worry and to come in. The guard suggested that little jurist had lost time while he was killing goblins, and Greaves asked the hero to call it a day. He put his hand on his friend and said that their partner was in a bad mood right now because he had a fight with the kami, and the guard shouted about hearing everything. Greaves wanted to know from the hero how it went. Juris decided to be honest and admitted that it didn't go well. His friend realized that as soon as he got there, he had gotten a high-ranking monster. Greaves patted Juris on the back and reassured him, because the important thing was that he was okay. The hero decided to report everything to the guild, after which they would go to Forest Store and head to the side. Greaves sighed tiredly and remembered his night shift. He shouted that as soon as he had the weekend off, he would immediately close no Furisu and ask the jurist to wait. As soon as the hero entered the store, he was immediately recognized by the other adventurers and assumed that he was out hunting for loose change again today. They knew that the hero only hunted goblins and assumed that one day he would kill them all here, but jurists thought that would not happen in this life. At the registration table, the lad was greeted by a surly girl who praised Mr. Juris for a great job. The lad placed the sack on the table and the girl accepted the 13 goblins, saying they would accept it. It seemed to Juris that the number of magical beasts was increasing recently, and he told Shirley about it. In addition, the goblins were becoming fewer in number on the contrary. In that case, it wasn't surprising that it started to bring less prey. He was right, and recently everyone had started to notice the D-rank beasts. The guy was saddened by the fact that all the goblins were outnumbered by the mountain bear, and thus he lost his money. Guy hoped that he would get something for the D-rank materials, but Shirley smiled and said that they don't accept such things. She apologized, but it was already decided and there was nothing to be done about it. Shirley suggested that Mr. Lawyer should try to increase his rank in that case, and the hero thought about it. For E rank and above, he needed to be a member of a group. Juris smiled and admitted that he wasn't very good at teamwork, and Shirley knew that herself. But Shirley believed that if Mr. Juris had the power of a rank TS, he could do well. Yet the hero believed that he did not know how to communicate with others. One of the people passing by approached the jurist and told him that the guy was still hunting the small-minded as well. It was the leader of a blue dragon scale group named Dake. Juris recognized the pumped-up large man, and a member of their group wanted to know from Juris if he was going to sit his pants down in the guild for long. The elven woman also asked the hero when he would finally stop giving Bagan trouble. In other words, they asked when the hero would join their group. But the hero thought it was their own fault for not heeding his warning. Eventually, their group was taken by surprise. Everyone started to retreat, but the Juridicus stood firm, and if it wasn't for the Bugon, the Juridicus would have died a long time ago. The hero looked at the leader, which took his gaze away from him. The guy admitted that he actually regretted teaming up with them, because this way they were dragging him down. The teammate asked the guy to keep quiet, for all the hero could do was hunt goblins. The leader reminded that without the group he would remain forever F ranks and did not choose to make sure that Juris was fine with it. But it was fine with the hero, for to him it was better this way than getting into more trouble. Bagan didn't have time to answer anything before they were suddenly interrupted by someone's voice asking them what the reason was for their ruckus. It appeared to be a long-bearded old man who was a guild master named Gringer. Master Gringer thought it was the jurist again, but the guy replied that they were the first to pick on him. The guild master became furious and ordered him not to interrupt him. Gringer also told the Bagan that they were late and everyone had already gathered. The group leader apologized and asked his guys to wait for him here. The hero was surprised when the guild master asked him to also follow him, but the guy didn't understand for what reason. Shirley asked the master to wait, because it was supposed to happen tomorrow, but the Gringer replied that he changed his mind. Besides, he didn't have time to wait anymore. The girl wanted to reply, but the master would not allow Shirley to cross him and ordered her to keep quiet and mind her own business. Juris didn't understand what their conversation was about, but Bagan ordered him to just follow him. The hero froze in surprise when he walked into the meeting room where a whole table of people sat. The guild leader decided to get straight to the point, and with the consent of the majority of the hunters of a rank, as well as his consent as guild master, Hunter F rank Juris is sentenced. They banish him from this town forever, which the guy was just shocked by. Toward nightfall, a mysterious masked figure approached the dungeon. As soon as the man approached the entrance, various monsters began to appear, which he was apparently waiting for. The masked man stood at the head of the magical beasts and ordered them to destroy everything in their path. The guild leader reiterated that a hunter of rank F named Juris is banished from this city forever. The hero didn't understand why this sudden decision and tried to clarify the situation. The leader of the Bright Hope group named Hitoribocchi decided to explain himself first. He said that the guy was only doing the job of hunting goblins, so this city didn't need him. The leader of the Knights of the Dawn, Sir Wilhelm, thought that he was paying too much attention to little things and the newcomers were suffering because of it. The head asked how long ago he became a hunter, and the boy recalled that it was about a year ago. It usually took about 3 months to establish a group and increase rank, but the guy had only ever hunted goblins. In the end, the guild leader asked the bowman to explain where this was going. The guy named Luca was the leader of the research squad and said that in the past few months, the goblin population had decreased by 20% compared to last year. Thus, they couldn't train newcomers, and so they concluded that they needed to expel the jurist. The phantom leader called Ankh smiled and told the guy that he was overdoing it. However, he wasn't going to complain about it. The leader of the Shadow Squad Iko was simply absent from the scene, and the leader of the Blue Dragon Scales Bagan decided to simply remain silent. But the hero tried to explain that if he killed one goblin, 2 more would come to replace him, and he was the only one hunting them. And yet, they had told him earlier that their numbers had dwindled. Juris suggested that the reason for that could be due to the D-rank magical beasts that had recently become more numerous. Luca didn't know what to reply to that and just looked away. Jifod decided that in this way the hero wanted to shift the responsibility to the monsters, while Wilhelm said that the guy had no shame or conscience. They had not received such information, and so the reduction in the number of goblins was entirely his fault. The guild leader gave the guy 3 days. In that time, he had to gather all his belongings and leave the city. The hero believed that it was pointless to argue here, and the entire council dispersed to go about their business. Bagan passed by Shirley's girlfriend and apologized. He asked to convey the apology to the jurist, but Shirley did not understand why he asked her to do so. And if he had something to say to him, the girl didn't understand why he wouldn't do it himself. The man was silent, and Shirley once more called out to Mr. Bagana. The hero heard the screams and approached Shirley, but the girl said it was all right. The guy smiled and said that he was banished, and Shirley apologized. After all, she had asked the head many times to change the decision. Well, the jurist asked her not to worry, for it was his own fault for not following the rules. He thanked Shirley for trying to protect him and waved goodbye. He wanted to be in time for the Ferris, or else he would close his shop before he got there before him. Shirley remained silent and only escorted the guy with a sad look. The hero reached Forest Diner, where he was greeted by a waitress. She was happy to see the jurist here again. The waitress and was his friend Forrest, and the guy apologized to her for the late visit. But the girl asked him not to worry about it and served the jurist his salad. She also wanted to give his order, which the hero was very happy about, for he had been waiting for it for quite a long time. The package contained noose mayonnaise, which the hero finally waited for and immediately opened the jar. He added it to the salad and tasted the dish. The hero was delighted with such a bright flavor and a slight sourness. The mayonnaise just perfectly complemented this dish. Ferris saw how much he liked it, but reminded him that mayonnaise was available here as well. But the hero explained that it didn't compare to the mayonnaise from Noose, and that wasn't it. Usually they add the whole egg to mayonnaise, but this one uses only egg yolks, and because of that, the flavor is only richer. In that case, Forrest wanted to order him more, but the hero apologized and said he wouldn't need any more. The girl was shocked after the guy's story and didn't understand why he was chased out of town. The fact was that he hunted monsters too often, and many people didn't like that. But Ferris thought that goblins were breeding like cockroaches, and he couldn't exterminate them so easily. Ferris lost her temper and decided that she would go to the guild master immediately, but the hero hung on to her dress and asked her not to. Juris thought that everything was fine and it was his own fault for not raising his rank. The girl knew he was not good at teamwork, but that was no reason to get rid of the man. She thought the guild master was a real egotist and things had gone downhill 2 years ago when he was appointed to the position. Juris didn't know that and was surprised by such a thing. The girl recalled that Juris hadn't been around back then and the head had called it cost-cutting. She didn't know if it was true and if he had reduced the number of guards, but the head had raised taxes on the contrary. To her, he would remain a miser even if disaster struck, and the guy thought she was talking about that disaster when waves of monsters get out of the dungeon. It was true, and 2 years ago, such a disaster had happened on a medium scale. It was said that the next such disaster would happen in 10 years. It became clear to the hero why he had cut back, and Ferris asked not to admire him, for he had just banished him. Juris made another mark in his notebook. It was 855 for the year, and he was still clearly a long way from his 1000th mark. The girl had been wondering for quite some time why he wrote the same thing, and the hero explained that it was his way of keeping count. This mark meant 5 goblins, and it was easier to count in groups than one at a time. This was the first time Forrest had seen this sign and decided to take a closer look at it. It seemed to her that it had a specific meaning. The hero explained that an old man from his village had told him about it, and it seemed to be a word that meant right. Forrest wondered in which country such words were present. They were startled by a Grievous who came up behind them and asked Forrest to give him food. He was shocked to hear the fact that the hero was driven out of town and given 3 days. The girl agreed that it was strange since the jurist was a good guy. Greaves had no doubt that the guildmaster behaved like that, only because of his personal dislike, and the guys decided to immediately go to him. The guy grabbed hold of Forest's dress and Greaves' leg, trying to stop them. That same night, Luca sat pensively on a stump and studied his notes. The lads turned to the leader and told Luca that they had found 10 orcs, 3 mountain bears, and 2 gargoyles in the northeast. Based on this, the bowman was convinced that there were more magical beasts of rank D as he suddenly heard a noise in the bushes and became wary. He cautiously looked out from under the bushes and noticed a whole army of magical beasts that looked quite intimidating and strong. His eyes blurred and the bowman thought to himself that this is very bad. The next day came 2 days before the disaster. The hero reached the dog, who was still waiting for him at the same place. Today he brought him sandwiches and finally got him mayonnaise, and immediately put it to use. Juris thought it was probably the last time he would feed him and asked the dog to eat well. The dog looked at the guy questioningly and Juris told him how yesterday he was invited to a meeting with the guildmaster and it turns out he was decided to be banished from the city. So the hero thought this was the last time they would see each other and stroked behind the dog's ear. He also thought that he should have thanked everyone before leaving. The boy noticed that the dog hadn't finished and thought he had had enough. But then he was surprised by a voice that asked his master where he was going. The hero turned around, trying to understand who was saying it, but there was no one nearby. The voice spoke again and said that the master would not cook for him anymore. Juris turned to the dog and it seemed to him that the voice had just come from him. The dog barked and said this shisho. The boy was shocked at the sight of the talking dog, but the dog rose up on its hind legs and said that the shisho was not a dog. The shisho was a kobold and the hero froze in place with surprise and incomprehension. The dog and the protagonist sat down opposite each other, and the jurist decided to make sure once again that the dog was the magical beast Kobold. The hero admitted that he had imagined kobolds a little differently, and in his imagination they were quite intimidating. But the jurist had never seen other kobolds in this area before and assumed he was all alone here. Sisho lowered his head and said that the griffin had killed his entire family, and he was the only survivor. The hero recalled that he had actually killed a griffin last year and the Sisho exclaimed that that was when he had saved him. It was on that very day that the jurist had massacred the big griffin. Sisho said that his master had saved him from certain death and had always fed him, and so he would like to repay him for his kindness. The lad asked him to wait a little while, for he did not understand what master the kobold was talking about. In the kobold language it meant the one who feeds him. A master is a master, so the Sisho decided that he would serve the jurist. The one who feeds him, that was right, but the guy wasn't sure if the Soshi would get to serve him since he was leaving here, so they would never see each other again. But the kobold said he would follow his master. Based on his words, he had nowhere else to return to, and Soshi sadly lowered his head. The hero smiled and in that case made his decision. They were both loners, and the jurist suggested that Soshi go traveling with him. Kobold barked and happily agreed to go traveling with the guy. The hero shook his friend's paw and said that it was a pleasure to meet Soshi, and Soshi reciprocated him. Juris was also surprised how the kobold started talking to him all of a sudden, but the Shisho didn't know it himself. But after he started eating his food, the words became clearer and Juris looked at the dish in his plate in surprise. The hero speculated that he might have unknowingly put an amplification on him. Sisho didn't realize what it was and the guy explained that it was support magic, an increase in strength, stamina, agility, and poison resistance. But he didn't think he could make the kobold talk. Sisho exclaimed that it was cool, since his master was a great mage, but the hero couldn't call himself that. Juris said it was time for him to go back to town, for he had to prepare to leave, and the kobold got ready to go with him. Juris was afraid that he would not be allowed into town and asked to wait for him here. Kobold agreed with his master, but then something strange caught the hero's eye. The guy saw a strange aura nearby and Kobold thought that something was wrong. Juris had a disgusted feeling from the traces of monsters and magical creatures near the dungeon. Sisho wanted to know what was bothering his master, but the hero smiled and said that everything was fine, suggesting that the kobold follow him. The kobold got up on his hind legs and happily walked behind his master. Meanwhile, Ferris and Greaves were pondering what they should do. Greaves didn't think they should have really turned a blind eye to all of this, but Juris had already made up his mind. But that still wasn't enough for the guy. After all, the jurist was being a do-gooder and was only doing this because he didn't want to cause them any trouble. But Ferris did not understand what they could do, because the hero had already been expelled from the guild. But then a girl came up to them and said that he hadn't been officially banished yet. Greaves and Forrest were surprised to see Shirley in front of them. The thing is that the guild master banished him from the city but didn't take away his hunter's license. Because of that, he can still join a branch in another city. Greaves didn't understand how she could leave things as they were, since the jurist hadn't done anything that he could be banished for. The girl believed this too, but as a mere employee, she was powerless. Ferris noticed Shirley's clenched fist and realized that she too was having a hard time. Juris was really a good guy, and as soon as he came here, he helped Greaves' little brother who was bullied by all the neighborhood boys, and they had been friends ever since. Forrest realized why Greaves felt that way about him, and the boy told them that he owed it to him to help him in some way. He wanted to make sure from Shirley that there was really nothing they could do. Shirley lowered her gaze, but their silence was interrupted by a jurist who had crept up unnoticed from behind and managed to scare everyone. Greaves smiled and said that they were thinking of ways to help him, but the hero had asked earlier not to worry about it. Besides, he wanted to give something to Forrest and pulled out a whole box from his magic backpack. The girl was shocked and didn't understand where he got it from. The hero said it was a magical box, inside of which it was bigger than it looked. Time passed in there so the food wouldn't spoil, and it was a gift for her shop. Ferris was worried that it could have been dangerous. Shirley was surprised that it was a top-grade magic tool and also wanted to ask about his bag. The hero smiled and said that he did it all by himself and didn't need the money. He just wanted them to use it for their health. Forrest and Greaves stood stunned at his words, not understanding how he could have done it himself. The boy also held out a fall gift to Greaves. It was a watch, and his friend was delighted, for not every nobleman could afford to buy one. Ferris could not believe that he had made them himself, and the hero said that he had made them while he was in the village. He asked them not to be surprised, for it wasn't that hard. Greaves opened the watch and asked what was in it, but the hero asked him not to touch it. Greaves did not understand what was the matter, and the jurist asked to listen to him carefully. If in the future his friend was in a desperate situation, he was to press that button. Greaves wondered what would happen if he pressed it, but the hero decided not to talk about it. It wasn't important, so he wasn't allowed to press that button unnecessarily. The hero also held out some gift to Shirley as well. It was an amulet given to him by an old man from his village, and it was said to bring good luck. The hero wanted her opinion, and the girl said it was very soft. Juris couldn't be completely sure what to get her, but the girl said she liked it. She promised that she would treasure it. In that case, Juris decided that he hadn't forgotten anything and said goodbye to the boys. Greaves could not believe that the hero was already leaving. Forrest also asked him to take his time, because they would surely think of something. But the hero's grandmother always told him to strike while the iron is hot. He's going to get kicked out of here one way or another, so Shirley asks the lawyer where he's going. Guy asked around at the visiting traders, and there was a fishing village called Nanto just south of here, sort of. Guy was sure he would find sashimi, a raw fish delicacy, there. Just the thought made his saliva flow, and he said he wanted to try it. Ferris huffed that only smoked or dried fish could be found here, and Greaves noticed that his friend was on the positive side. The friends escorted lawyer to the gate, and the boy asked his friends to take care of themselves. Greaves asked him not to doubt and remarked that lawyer's optimism was impenetrable, and there was no stopping him. Ferris almost cried and asked him not to forget them. The hero headed for the exit and once again waved goodbye to the guys. After the jurist passed through the tunnel, the boys noticed a kobold greeting him. Shirley thought about the fact that in any other guild, such a summary banishment would never have happened. She had no idea what the guild leader's intentions were. The head only looked out the window and was glad that he had managed to get rid of another headache. He wasn't going to tolerate people going against his will in this city. There was also a bow in the head's office, and the head wanted to know what was written in his notes. The fact was that the number of magical beasts had been abnormally increasing recently, but the chapter didn't understand what the onion wanted to say. These were most likely signs of impending disaster. But only 2 years had passed since the previous catastrophe, and nothing should have happened for the next 10 years. At least that's what the guild leader thought. But the bow explained that the number of magic anomalies around the dungeon was also increasing, and they should have been more careful just in case. But the head thought that it was a good thing, because the more monsters there were, the more work they got and the risk pay was decent. Therefore, there was simply nothing to complain about here. Luca was terrified and couldn't imagine what would happen if things were left as they were. And so the last day before the disaster remained. Meanwhile, the guys were having a fun day at the guild and laughing. Shirley called Mr. Cabos and asked him for a moment. But Cabos didn't understand what Shirley wanted from him. Shirley wanted him to take her to Mr. Bagan, for she had something to talk to him about. But the elf said that the Bagan was busy at the moment and he had no time to talk to her. But Shirley was persistent and asked to take her to him. Cabos was frightened by this determination of the girl and decided not to argue with her. Meanwhile, Bagan was sitting at the table drinking and his weapons were folded. He wanted to know the reason why Shirley was looking for him, and the girl notified that Mr. Juris had left town yesterday. He had previously asked her to convey her apology on his behalf, and Shirley wanted to know the reason for it. Bagan drank a glass of drink and said that it was none of her business, but Shirley decided that she would work it out for herself. Something strange was going on in the guild, and to expel Mr. Juris simply for not wanting to band together was too cruel. Bagan explained that he was annoying the Gringer and the guy had been on his radar for a long time, so there was nothing they could do to help him. But Shirley thought that one guild master had no right to make such a judgment, but he was supported by a rank of hunters. Bagan angrily put the glass on the table and said that he was against it, but if he spoke openly about it, he would also be flown in. Thus, the Shirley assumed that he had decided to defend himself. That was so, and it was a pity for Bagan, for he had just gotten this position and he didn't want to lose it all that way. But still he felt sorry for Juris and he tried to protect him. Once he tried to make him part of his group, but it all went down the drain. Shirley didn't realize that he wanted to make Juris part of the Blue Dragon Scale group. That was true, and apparently, Shirley herself noticed something, that Juris was far from F or D rank. Shirley knew this, but she was still not unaware of how truly powerful the Juris was and asked for this information to be shared with her. Bagan remembered that he had taken him on a mission then. A member of the group asked the Juris to move faster or they would leave him. Then they threw a big bag on him and the hero wondered what they put in there. The guy answered that there was camping equipment, canned food, medicine, sharpening stones, and many other things. But the hero didn't understand what they were carrying all that stuff for. Usually ranks don't do such things, but today Bagan decided to train a jurist. The elf told the hero that he was new, so they should teach him how the group's tasks go. And if they didn't need a new team member so badly, they wouldn't have fiddled with him at all. Ahead of them was the group camp, and Bagan said that it was where they usually rested and prepared for battle. The elf noted gloatingly that such places were only available to groups of rank B and above, so as a newcomer he was denied passage. The group walked towards the camp and circled the mountain before Bagan pointed to the arrival point. Juris noticed a couple of houses that were located on the slopes of the mountain. All they had to do was to get the supplies there and their job would be done. Consider it, they had accomplished the mission of escorting. But the hero asked them to wait, for he had a bad feeling. It seemed to him that going further would be a bad idea, and perhaps there was a magical beast lurking ahead. The elf and the guy glanced at each other, then laughed at his words. The elf thought that as a newcomer, he didn't know that there were no dangerous beasts in this area, and even if one appeared, it would be an F-rank beast at most. The dark-haired guy also said that they would run away as soon as they saw them and didn't understand why the lawyer was so scared. The man with glasses assumed that the guy was nervous because it was his first assignment, but they were strong enough to handle any surprises. Therefore, he might not have been worried. But no sooner had they gone any further than the same man was attacked by a huge magical beast and all the squad members turned around. It was a Durgle that was a rank a chimera. No one expected that there could be such a beast here, and Bagan drew his weapon. The dark-haired guy ordered everyone to take off their bags and needed to find their weapons as quickly as possible. Before Bagan knew it, the chimera was at his back. The man turned around and saw another creature in front of him. He thought he was being mocked and didn't understand how there could be two magical beasts of such rank here. While the magical beasts were surrounding the Bagan, the hero wanted to help him, but the squad members stood in the way. There was nothing he could do, so the Bagan ordered everyone to run away while he distracted the chimeras. All three of the group, without even thinking, immediately started to run away, but the jurists stayed where they were. Bagan didn't realize what he was doing and ordered him to run away as well. The leader tried to strike the chimera, but the beast deftly leapt to the side of the second chimera. The magical beasts pounced on the guy, but the hero slipped under them as they jumped. In the same seconds, he used wind magic on the chimeras and the beasts froze in midair. Bagan was shocked when he saw the bodies of the chimeras shattered into pieces. At that time, their group hid behind the bushes and asked the leader if he was alright. When the group came out to the others, they marveled at the strength of the Bagan, thinking about the fact that he had slain the two chimeras. One of the squad members called Juris a fool and didn't understand how he could sit there and rest. Shirley was shocked when she heard about the guy tackling the two chimeras single-handedly. Juris hadn't told anyone about it before, as if they were a joke to him. In any case, the Bagan didn't doubt his strength, and it would even be a pity to give such a talent to another group, much less groups of F and D rank. But now he was expelled, and it didn't matter anymore. With those words, Bagan finished his drink. Shirley realized that he was withholding this information because he was afraid that the truth would disgrace the Blue Dragon Scales. Bagan asked her to say what she wanted, but he never ended up forming a group. Gringer had long had a grudge against him and would have been banished sooner or later. Shirley understood the situation and believed that the Bagan would not help her hold Gringer accountable. The man apologized, but he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to become like her or the Juris, but the girl didn't understand what he meant. While Shirley was talking to the leader, Rick-san was heading towards them. The guy had no choice but to turn to her. Shirley asked the Bugon what it meant, and apparently she hadn't noticed yet. She hadn't been banished yet because the Gringer was afraid of the negative reaction from her supporters, and if not for that, he would have done it long ago. Therefore, it was better not to go against him, because the head possessed connections. The order for his appointment as guild master came from the capital itself. Before Bagging could finish speaking, there was a knock on the door. Shirley realized that she couldn't just turn a blind eye. At this rate, the city that her father was protecting would disappear. But then her thoughts were interrupted. The girl was surprised to see Rick-san in front of her, and the guy tried to catch his breath. He talked about how their business was bad if they left things as they were, but Shirley asked him to calm down and tell her what the matter was. Mr. Rick took a breath and said that disaster was coming to them. No one even noticed that a Hitoribocchi was eavesdropping on them at that moment. On the day of the disaster, the Shirley was told to get the paperwork done faster. Shirley promised that she would do everything and asked to get in line. There were quite a few people at the registration desk today. One group was on their way to an assignment and asked Shirley to register them. Others were asking Shirley to bring drinks and yelling about how they had soiled the floor. The girl was literally bursting with things to do. While the Shirley was crouching down to catch her breath, Mr. Jiffod approached her and noticed that she was all business. The girl apologized and said that the rest of the staff had taken the day off, and the guy acknowledged that she was having a hard time. He leaned into the girl's ear and said that she wouldn't be able to dig under the guild master that way. And apparently, he was right. Jiffod asked her not to be so surprised, and that she shouldn't think that the Gringer master didn't know about her little rebellion. Suddenly, everyone but her decided to go on vacation, and it was clearly not a coincidence. The head of the Gringer guild was well aware of her actions. The girl didn't understand what they were doing all this for, and Gringer called her an honest and kind child. Indeed, the Hitoribocchi thought that kicking her out of the city, it was better to keep her as a servant until her death. After all, she was the daughter of the previous guild master, and Jifford could not imagine what it would be like for her to watch her city rot. A gloating smirk appeared on his face. Guy explained that they were doing this because he and his men wanted to move on with their lives in this peaceful city. No disasters, high pay and high-ranking hunter status. And as long as Shirley is at Mr. Gringer's side, there will be no worries in life. That's why they didn't like anyone sticking their noses in their business. Shirley didn't understand how they could do that, and the Hitoribocchi said that she could also join them. After all, nothing would happen to her then. Jiffod reminded her that she loved her town, and anyway, it was protected by her father. The girl fended off the guy's hand and said that disaster was coming, so they had to act immediately. Jiffod already knew that she had learned about this from the bowman and asked her not to believe the coward's tales. Besides, it had only been 2 years since the last disaster, but Shirley still thought he might have been right. Jifford noticed that she was rather stubborn, and warned the girl that if she were to arise much, she would one day be cast out as well. Jifford also knew that the Shirley was not supported by many people. At that time, the guards on the walls of the city noticed something strange. In the distance, where the dungeon was located, a strange ominous aura was emanating. The masked man that summoned the monsters destroyed the core inside, and a small crystal fell out from there. The small crystal contained some kind of energy, and it struck straight into the center of the mountain, creating an unimaginable powerful explosion. The guards were terrified and couldn't believe their eyes. To them it was a delusion, and they began to think that a catastrophe was coming to them. The guards began to strike the bell, and all present in the city heard the alarm. The sky nearby began to darken, and all the guards shouted that disaster was coming and everyone needed to take up fighting positions. Jifford could not understand where the noise was coming from, and the girl pushed him out of the way in order to go outside. As they opened the doors, they saw a dark cloud of energy that was approaching their city. All sorts of different magical monsters began to appear from the black clouds. The guards thought it was rather strange and couldn't understand where so many magical beasts were coming from. Previously, the soldiers had never seen such a large-scale disaster, and a soldier asked the Greaves to contact the Hunters Guild because they had an urgent situation. One of the soldiers asked them to look ahead and pointed a finger in front of them. Apparently, the magical beasts were preparing an aerial attack, and the soldiers were ordered to grab their bows. They were going to shoot them down in flight. Despite that, the magical beasts, and including the rank ogres, sneaked into the city. The soldiers ordered the immediate evacuation of the civilians. Jiffod thought it was some kind of joke, since the disaster couldn't have happened so quickly. But the Shirley didn't even listen to him and silently went about her business. She went up to the office of the head of the guild and explained to the master that they had a disaster and he had to take command. Mr. Gringer did nothing and the girl wanted to know what was the matter. She approached the head of the guild who couldn't believe his eyes. But the girl shouted that this is reality, and during the disaster, the guild master takes command over the guards and hunters. So she wished he would give them orders faster. The master waved the Shirley away and ordered her not to talk nonsense, because the disaster is still 10 years away, and there must be some mistake. But some of the beasts had already invaded the city, and the head didn't want to hear anything. He refused to believe that it could happen. That's why he chose this city. He jabbed his finger at the girl and ordered her to do something about it. At this time, Greaves burst into the master's office and said that a disaster had begun and it was necessary for him to take command. He caught a picture of Shirley slapping Greaves with a powerful slap. From the unexpected blow, the head fell to the floor and the girl said that it was disgusting to look at him, for he was a coward. She left him to the Greaves and leaving the office asked him not to let him escape. The girl went outside and gave orders to all the hunters. All groups needed to prepare their weapons and gather in front of the gate. Instead of the guild master, the Shirley would take all command. For a moment, everyone froze in surprise and the girl demanded that they move. Gifford did not understand anything and asked what happened to the head Gringer. Shirley replied that he had refused to fulfill his duties and assumed that Gifford was also about to run away. Gifford went into a stupor, and in the meantime soldiers entered Sir William's room and notified him that a disaster had occurred. Finally, it was time to show their knightly honor, and the soldiers were ready to show the monsters what they could do. The knights approached the throne where Sir William sat. For whatever reason their head was not moving and the knight put his hand on the armor of Wilhelm. He tried to find out what was the matter, for now it was time for battle. But his armor just fell apart and the knights were horrified to realize that Wilhelm had escaped. Gifford followed Shirley, trying to figure out what she was doing. He didn't understand what she would do, for the magical beasts were already in the city. Shirley moved closer to the monster that was massacring the soldiers and picked up the weapons of the defeated soldiers. The huge orc noticed the girl and pounced on her to attack. But with one swing of her sword, the Shirley severed his arm, after which she pierced his head through. In the same second the Ranka monster was defeated and Gifford couldn't believe his eyes. Gifford wondered who the Shirley was. While the monsters were destroying everything in their path and attacking civilians, Bagan was trying to figure out what was going on here. Shirley went up the stairs to the captain of the guard and asked for a report on the situation. The captain was surprised to see Shirley here and asked where the Gringer was, but the girl replied that he would not come. Instead of him, the Shirley was now in command. The commander realized that this lazy man had abandoned his duty and decided that the Shirley would help them more than him and asked to see it. The commander had never seen a disaster of this magnitude before and decided to be honest. He wasn't sure they had enough strength, but the Shirley said they still had time before the main force arrived. Right now, they needed to focus on evacuating the civilians and fighting the infiltrating monsters. The commander would love to do that, but they didn't have enough soldiers to do that. In addition, they had another problem. The thing was that the Gringer were saving money on everything, even fixing their weapons, and their ballistae were out of order. They had minimal men and weapons and Shirley was furious. Shirley suggested contacting the local defense group from the capital, and the commander said he had already sent to them from the fastest horse, but he didn't think they would get to him in time. Shirley thought about the fact that they only had to defend themselves and said that the hunters were waiting at the gate. She asked the captain to concentrate on evacuating the civilians and allocate her some soldiers to set up defenses on the bridge. Shirley told the group of adventurers how the situation was, and they would defend the gate and prevent the beasts from penetrating the walls of the city. The members of the Dragon Scale group asked to wait a bit. He didn't understand why they were commanded by her, and the elf also disagreed. Since there wasn't a guild master here, a Bagan should have replaced him. They believed that she had never even fought and didn't understand why they had to listen to her. Everyone else heard this and also started supporting the guys and rebelling. Suddenly an old man named Lancef shouted that the Valkyrie had returned and everyone around them freaked out. The old man shouted that he had waited a long time for this day when the Valkyrie would rejoin the battle, and Shirley looked at Lancef in surprise. The boys didn't understand why he said it so suddenly and didn't know he was so emotional. They weren't here 2 years ago, so they didn't know that Shirley wasn't just the daughter of the previous guild master. The thing is, she's the strongest rank hunter in the entire Nyanil. She has defeated quite a few magical beasts, and even during the disaster, she fought in the front lines. For her beauty and bravery, she was nicknamed the Valkyrie. The old man wiped his tears and said that he had waited a long time for this moment when their Shirley would return to them. but the girl asked Mr. Lancef not to embarrass her. Just then the Bagan came up to them and said that the Lancef was right. According to the Bagan, Shirley was now the only one who could control the whole situation, and they would follow her. The girl addressed all the residents and asked them to entrust their lives to her. The boys had little time, for right now a whole horde of magical beasts was coming at them. The people were shocked by their numbers and didn't realize how they would deal with them. Shirley asked everyone to take up defenses on the bridge, and the mages and archers needed to take the left and right flanks. Someone from afar shouted to Shirley to join them. It was the Lord of the Bow, who was at the very top of the castle. He said that they would observe the situation and inform them of everything. All the members of his group had already taken their positions. If anything goes wrong with the evacuation or new monsters appear in the city, they will inform them. Shirley was pleased and thanked Luca-san, but she was asked not to be distracted. The magical beasts were on their way and Shirley asked everyone to get ready to fight, but someone asked her to wait. It was a Hitoribocchi who decided to prove himself and asked to leave them on him. The members of his group were crazy about the Jiffod and shouted that he was just great. The guy looked at the surprised girl and said that he didn't want to see people thinking about him slacking off on his work. Jiffod bared his hero sword and ordered the beasts to attack him. One of the monsters immediately pounced on him and Jiffod swung for a strike, but unfortunately his sword broke right through the monster's head. The magical beast thought this was funny, and the Hitoribocchi immediately ran to the others for help. He ran up to the girls and asked them to help do something about it. The girls looked at the guy coldly, realizing that the only good thing about him was his face, and refused to help him. Jiffod was horrified as the magical headed in his direction. The moment the monster approached them, Shirley pushed off the Jiffod's back and gave the monster a crushing blow. The guy was not happy that she used him as a springboard, and the girl ordered everyone to go on the attack. All the humans prepared for battle, as well as the magical beasts. While the humans crushed the mostly goblins, the mages used fire magic. While the battle between the humans and the magical beasts was boiling, Luke ordered the soldiers to use fire arrows. But suddenly, the guy noticed a strange demonic leg from a black cloud and asked to look at it. Shirley. Greaves also fought on the front lines and massacred goblins. He was terrified because there was no end to the magical beasts. He was worried that Ferris had not escaped in time. At that moment, a huge dragon behind him destroyed the wall, and one of the debris hit him in the head. The hero fell to the ground for a moment, trying to realize what had happened, and looked back. He thought it was simply impossible, seeing the enormous thing in front of his eyes. In front of him stood the very real huge dragon. The magical beast in the guise of a dragon had 2E's rank. Shirley couldn't understand where this terrifying speed was coming from, and the fortress wall began to collapse. Bagan approached the Shirley and said that their case was bad, because there was a real dragon against them. But there was another trouble. One of the soldiers exclaimed that their gate had jammed and the girl ran to help. The hooded guy asked the Shirley to wait and not try to open them, but the Shirley didn't understand why. The man asked her to look up, and if she opened the gate, the wall would collapse and she would be under the rubble. In that case, they had nowhere to retreat to, and the Shirley was terrified at the mere sight of this huge creature. The huge dragon spewed flames that destroyed half the city in an instant, and Greaves said there was no way they could handle such a beast. Greaves remembered a gift from a friend who asked him to press the clock button if he ever found himself in a desperate situation in the future. Greaves believed in Juris and pressed the button, and the hero asked to look at this sitcho. Right in front of them was the sea, which was the source of seafood, and the guy was delighted. Cobalt and his master jumped up on the spot, thinking about what they would eat to their heart's content, when suddenly right in the jump they were teleported somewhere. The guy was desperate and looked at his watch. Greaves yelled out his friend's name and said nothing happened. The huge dragon looked straight into the guy's eyes, and Greaves tried with his last strength to run away. The dragon wanted to spew flames as it suddenly fell down right in front of Greaves, and a voice asked the guy if he was okay. It turned out to be Juris, who was happy to see his friend. He smiled at Greaves and greeted him. While Shirley was fighting the monsters, she asked everyone who was injured to retreat and take care of the treatment. Bagan shouted to Shirley that they couldn't handle it that way, and the monsters didn't get any smaller. The girl said that they needed to buy time until the defense team arrived. While she was addressing Bagan, she didn't notice one of the magical beasts climbing on the wall behind her. Bagan shouted to Shirley, and the girl turned around, seeing a huge monster in front of her. Shirley barely had time to block its blow before the huge monster threw her back and the Bagan screamed. Shirley tried to land on her feet, then she caught the moment and struck the sword right into the belly of the beast. After that, consciousness began to slowly leave her. While everything was blurring in front of her eyes, she apologized to her father and said that he defended this city at the cost of his life. Tears welled up in Shirley's eyes and she felt that she had an obligation to protect the city. Suddenly some writing spread across the city and one of the people saw in it the magic of barriers. The amazing magic began to strike all the monsters in the area and push them back. The Shirley was approached by a guy who apologized for being late. Juris stood right in front of her eyes, and next to him was his kobold. The girl was surprised to see Mr. Juris here and the guy smiled at her. The hero handed Shirley her glasses and asked her to leave everything else to him. Bagan was also surprised to see the guy here, for he thought he had left the city. The hero told how Greaves had summoned him, and the situation was really worse than he expected. Bagan didn't understand how Greaves was able to summon him, but the jurist said that wasn't the main thing right now. First they needed to heal all the wounded and arm them. The guy shook out right in front of Shirley all of his belongings that he had in his magic bag. He explained that all his spare armor, weapons, and arrow supplies were here. The hero handed the girl a potion and asked her to drink it in order for her strength to be restored immediately. Shirley thought that he had better take care of the civilians, but the guy asked not to worry about it. Meanwhile, one of the goblins targeted a peaceful family of locals, but got hit in the face with a frying pan. It was Faris, who combatively dealt with a small goblin. She turned to the civilians and told them to run away from here quickly. Faris threatened that the magical beasts would remember their city for a long time and clutched the frying pan tighter. But there was no way she expected that a huge magical beast with fangs was waiting for her around the corner of the building. Faris crouched down on her knees and smiled nervously at the thought that there was nothing she could do. She had already prepared to be killed when suddenly someone gave the monster a blow to the head. It turned out to be Greaves, who was worried about Faris. The girl sobbed at the thought of being finished, but the guy asked her not to worry about anything else. He put his hand on Faris' shoulder. The girl was surprised to see the strange armor on the griffs. The guy explained that the jurist had come back to them and he had supplied all the soldiers with weapons and armor, and now they were invincible. Greaves asked the girl to run away immediately, but she was against it, for there were still inhabitants in the city whom she could not leave behind. Besides, the shop where she worked belonged to her and her father, and she would not let some monsters destroy it. In that case, Greaves asked the girl to stand still and keep still. Faris didn't understand what he was doing and the guy put his armor on her. The armor was enchanted, and so she wasn't afraid of any monster. Besides, it would only make it easier for Greaves to move. The girl asked Greaves to wait, but the guy was already running away and asked her not to worry about anything, because he will definitely come back alive. Faris noticed that the armor was very heavy and she could not move in it. The heavy helmet fell directly over her eyes, and she desperately asked for help. Meanwhile, the members of the Dragon Scale group couldn't believe that a newcomer could arrange such a thing. But the bow shouted to everyone that it was true. After all, the guy was awfully strong and even defeated the dragon with one punch. Shirley was glad to see the onion safe and sound. Luca waved to the girl and said that it was all thanks to the jurist. Shirley decided to drink the potion she got from the jurist and her body glowed. Apparently it was support magic and everyone else looked at each other while holding the same potion. The whole city began to drink these potions, after which their strength was restored and even doubled. Bagan looked at his hand, and it was amazing to him that his strength was growing. It was the ultimate elixir, and the elf didn't understand how the juridic had gotten it. The hero replied that the boys in his village had taught him how to make it, and the elf and Bagan thought he was joking. Juris told the boys that the barrier was about to collapse, so he had to go. Bagan didn't realize where he was going and the guy pointed his finger outside the town. The hero was ready to take care of them, and that way no one would get into the city. But the Bagan said that no matter how strong he was, the Juris wouldn't overpower them all, and they needed to hold out until reinforcements arrived. But the boy smiled at the Bagan and assured him that he could handle it. The kobold followed his master and leapt upward after him. The hero noticed that there were quite a lot of magical beasts, and they were everywhere, so it was okay to not hold back. Juris found himself quite high above the ground and used ice magic. He created thousands of ice shards that rained down on the magical beasts. After that, the hero landed on the ground and used magic from the earth. Around the guy, sharp huge spikes started to appear from the ground and the masked man thought that something was wrong. The monster leader couldn't understand where this strange feeling came from. The entire ground around Juris began to explode and monsters rapidly began to disappear. For some reason, the hero felt stronger than usual and couldn't understand what it was related to. The hero hoped that Shisho was alright and said that if he was injured, he could wait it out in the city. But then he noticed the kobold deftly dodging the magical beasts, pushing them against each other. Shisho replied that he was fine and thanks to his master's food, He felt great. Cobalt saw the very monster that attacked his family in front of him. Shisho bared his teeth at the beast and said that there was nothing he could do then. The Griffon had killed his entire family. He just ran away. But the Cobalt thought he would not lose to him again and sank his fangs right into the beast's throat. The Shisho then ripped the Griffin's head off and it fell dead to the ground. Shisho was so pleased that he howled like a wolf, and the Juris was pleased with him. No matter how many monsters they killed, new ones kept appearing, and the hero decided that this was not the way to go. He used light magic, which he pointed directly at the horde of monsters. Black clouds began to disperse from the light, but the hero realized that soon they will recover back and needed to hit the dungeon itself. The hero shouted to the Cobalt that he was going into the dungeon and asked him to stay with Shirley and the others, but the Shisho refused and said he could fight. The guy still asked him to stay with the others, for it was too dangerous, but the Cobalt stood his ground and said he would go with his master as well. Juris looked back at the whole horde of monsters and was no longer sure he could leave him here. Cobalt was glad when his master called him to come with him to the dungeon. Juris asked Shisho to climb on his back and hold on tight as he flew. The hero soared into the air and promised the boys that they had a little more to go. Shirley noticed that the monsters were getting smaller and offered to throw them off. Bagan told the girl that the scales of the blue dragon would take care of everything. Bagan looked back at his group, who had been waiting a long time for the moment to show all they could do. The leader of the group raised his shield and ordered the Blue Dragon Scale group to advance. The Blue Dragon Scale group had their backs to each other, thus attacking the enemy from all sides. Meanwhile, the hero along with the Cobalt approached the entrance to the dungeon. Juris warned Shisho that he would use wind magic to reach the center of the dungeon. The hero noticed that the inside was empty, but all the monsters were outside. No sooner had he walked further than he abruptly stopped and looked down. Juris was surprised as he watched the dungeon collapse and didn't understand the reason why this was happening. He decided that he and Shisho should fly even lower. Thus, the heroes reached a corridor with doors, and Juris told the Shisho that they had reached their destination. The guy destroyed the entrance inside and saw a human silhouette in front of him. He assumed it was the dungeon boss, and the masked man turned to the hero. Juris did not expect it to be a human being specifically, and was surprised by it. It was immediately clear to the masked man that it was Juris who was making him uncomfortable. The guy was certainly surprised that it was a human, but the main thing was that he had to overpower him. Juris used attack magic against the boss, but was baffled that he just reflected it. The masked man swiftly approached the hero and grabbed him by the throat. Cobalt was scared for his master, but the dungeon boss didn't know how to make sense of it all. The enemy was surprised and assumed that the guy was a hero. Meanwhile, Shisho wasn't going to sit on the sidelines and attack the enemy, thus throwing off his mask. The man pushed the Cobalt away with magic, and the Juris saw the face of the enemy. He was shocked and could not believe his eyes. The enemy silently pushed Juris away with magic, and the hero slammed into the wall. The blow was so strong that blood came from his mouth, and Shisho screamed to his master. Cobalt could not understand how this was possible, for there were two masters in front of him. The enemy with the same face as the Juris put on his mask again. The man said that his real name was the master of these dungeons. The hero became convinced that he was the one to blame for all these disasters. Guy decided to ask if he was really the source of the invasion of magical beasts that spawned dungeons all over the world. That was correct, and he was the one who had spawned the dungeons and controlled them. The hero wanted to say that everyone was in trouble because of him, but the man assumed that everyone was glad. Juris couldn't understand where he got that from. The man explained that the dungeon was the birthplace of the magical beasts that people hunted. They received bounty and sustenance for it. It was even possible to create treasures there, which people would love to get their hands on. And all of this was created by none other than him. The hero cried out that people were dying from the paws of magical beasts, but the masked man thought it was natural. If humans would hunt them, the beasts would do the same. And it was called symbiosis. And more importantly, now was why the Juris was here. The masked man didn't understand what he was going to do by appearing in front of him, but the hero didn't understand what he meant. The boss assumed the hero didn't know anything and thought it was probably even for the best. The enemy had one piece of advice for the hero, and he said that whatever the Juris did, people wouldn't accept him, and of course, they as demons wouldn't either. The masked man thought that their time was over and he could live out his days with the Cobalt in peace. After all, he would remain lonely all his life as well. The hero did not understand what he was saying or what he even meant. At that moment, the crystal that was behind the dungeon boss shattered. The dungeon boss decided that they had run out of magical elements and created a new crystal, which he placed in the center of the structure. He explained to the hero that this thing helped make the dungeon stable. Indeed, as soon as the crystal appeared in the structure, the dungeon wall immediately rebuilt itself. The invasion of magical beasts is a temporary outbreak of the unstable dungeon core. The core had reached the end of its lifespan, and by replacing the core, stability could be restored and the disaster could be stopped. At this point, the dungeon master decided to say goodbye to the hero and said that they were unlikely to meet again. But the jurist asked him to wait. The hero had no sooner approached the enemy than he disappeared, and the guy tried to understand what had just happened. Jurist gritted his teeth and the kobold called out to his master. He wanted to tell his mentor that everyone outside was worried about them, and the hero suggested they get out of here. Meanwhile, all the people in the town were fighting monsters, and Shirley began to notice that they started to disappear. All the people were excited, and the guy from the Dragon Scale group shouted that they had stopped the invasion of magical beasts. Bagan walked up to the Shirley and smiled, telling the girl that this was their victory, and the Valkyrie fell to her knees with her sword. Shirley smiled and said that was just great. No one noticed a female figure appeared on the mountainside. It was the leader of the shadow gang named Iko, who was trying to figure out what happened, because the surroundings were completely clear. A man on horseback rode up behind her and asked her to report the situation, but everything could be seen with her own eyes. In any case, they needed to merge with the city garrison, and the leader of the group ordered the soldiers to move forward. Meanwhile, the hero along with the cobalt in his hands were trying to escape from the dungeon using speed magic. Soshi and Juris saw the doors to the dungeon closing right in front of them, and the kobold asked the master to hurry up. At the very last moment, they managed to get out of the dungeon and the doors slammed shut. The hero never even thought that the destroyed dungeon would return to its former state, and the heroes were almost trapped inside the dungeon with all the dangers. In any case, they should have gone back, and so Soshi and Juris proceeded to the city. As soon as the squad arrived in the city, the young commander of the provincial defense introduced himself by the name of Hugh Aldrich. He was here on a request for help. Shirley introduced herself as an office clerk for the Hunters Guild and apologized. The Dragon Scale group proudly announced that they had dealt with the magical beasts on their own, and if they had come a little earlier, they would have been able to see how they had been successful here. In any case, Hugh wanted to talk to Guildmaster Sir Gringer first and asked where he was now. A voice was heard behind them saying that their guildmaster was here. It was Greaves, who was holding on his shoulder the bound guildmaster. He jumped down from the castle walls and carelessly threw the old man to the ground. Gringer didn't understand how the guy could do that to him and get away with it, but Greaves ordered him to shut up. He was trying to run away, so he tied him up. Gringer noticed the provincial defense commander in front of him and ordered them all arrested. While the hero was trying to sneak out of the city, Gringer shouted that the jurists had rebelled against him, so they had to banish every last one of them. Shirley thought that Mr. Aldridge would not do such a thing, but it would save him a lot of trouble, and he asked the girl to be quiet. Hugh pulled out his papers and told Sir Gringer that he was suspected of falsifying the directive to appoint a guildmaster from the king's imperial edict. The commander did not understand the reason why Gringer was in Lionor if he was originally appointed guildmaster in the western part of the continent. All the people started discussing this and remembered that Went was an abandoned village. In addition, the commander only now found out that he had tried to escape despite the unprecedented disaster with the magical beasts. Gringer asked him to stop, for he had misunderstood everything, and to listen to him. Hugh was willing to hear him out so much in the high court and ordered a soldier to put him on a horse. Greaves clarified with Shirley that the Gringer was not actually a real guildmaster. The commander looked at the girl and verified that her name was Shirley. Hugh smiled and assumed that she was the rumored war maiden who was in command of the whole situation. With all due respect, it was true, and Shirley became uncomfortable. The commander said it was excellent, and it was immediately obvious the daughter of the previous guildmaster, Sir Albert Dorrington. From this point on they were to rebuild the town, but there was now no one to lead it for lack of a guildmaster, so Hugh appointed Shirley Dorrington as temporary guildmaster on his behalf. There also he wanted to hear objections, if there were any. The girl looked uncertainly at the adventurers and Bagan smiled, saying she would be perfect for the role. Shirley bowed to the commander and said she would respectfully accept the decision. In the end, the whole town applauded the girl and everyone was happy about the decision. There was a jurist in the front rows who held his finger up and congratulated Shirley. The girl was happy, and after that the rebuilding of the city of Lionor began under the leadership of Deputy Guildmaster Shirley. 2 weeks later, Greaves was again surprised by the news that the jurist was going to leave the city. 2 weeks after the magical beast invasion, a friend was in no way expecting that Juris was leaving town again. but the hero thought it was time. But the Greaves reminded him that no one had chased him out of here. While Greaves was arguing with the hero, the girls approached them. Shirley was dressed quite differently, and Greaves was surprised at the sight. Ferris thought it looked very nice on her and wanted to know what the others thought. Shirley smiled and told the guys that now that she was a guildmaster, she had to dress appropriately. But Forrest sighed and said that she couldn't always dress like a secretary. Juris smiled and complimented her, saying that it suited her very well, and the girl blushed. Besides, it seemed to Ferris that she could become a real guildmaster. The originally appointed master liked the quiet town of Went, where there are no major invasions of magical beasts, and declined the appointment, so the position in Lionor became vacant. And so Mr. Aldridge of the local defense corps strongly recommended that Shirley be placed in that position. Greaves felt that with a guildmaster like Shirley, the town would immediately find peace. By the way, the girl wanted to make sure that the jurist was really going to leave town, and the guy said he was. Ferris remembered something and took Greaves aside, saying they had some business to attend to. Greaves didn't understand what it was about, but apparently Ferris wanted to leave Shirley and Lawyer alone. Greaves waved goodbye to his friend and said they would meet later. He also asked him not to leave under his breath. Shirley sat down next to the hero and said that the banishment assigned to Gringer had been cancelled by her, and he now did not need to leave this city forcibly. But the jurist realized this himself. He still remembered leaving his hometown and coming to this one. The people and places, it was all new to him. All in all, it was hard, but he found a job and thought he could basically settle here. But things were not going well. He was constantly having trouble with other hunters, and he gave the Shirley a lot of trouble. The girl exclaimed that this wasn't true, but the boy realized that he didn't know this world at all. Not the people living here, nor the magical animals around. So no matter what, he was going to set out on his journey. Shirley didn't know what to answer him, so the hero said that he was thinking of going to Nant City for now, because he was the one who had originally planned to do it, and he thought it was quite a good idea. Besides, he hadn't given up his desire to eat sashimi yet, and the girl understood him. Shirley handed him an envelope and asked him to take it with him. The hero assumed it was a letter, and the girl knew he would say that one day. It was a letter of recommendation from her Lionor guildmaster. This letter would make it easier for him to register as a hunter in Nant, and the hero thanked the Shirley for such a valuable thing. Shirley also said that he could rely on a girl named Ninya, for she was sure that the girl would help him. Shirley handed the hero a pouch. The guy realized that there was money in there, and the girl said that it was his reward for the invasion of magical animals. Shirley marveled at the fact that the number of animals he had killed was over 1,000, and it was simply incredible. Although to be honest, she thought that this money was not enough for him. That is, the remainder would be paid in several installments. But the hero reminded that he was a rank F, so he could not receive this money. But the Shirley replied that with her powers she would remedy this, and everything would be alright. The hero smiled and said that it would be enough for him and he would donate the rest to the reconstruction of the city. Besides, they obviously didn't have any money from behind the Gringer. Shirley exclaimed that this was not true, and most of the taxes wrongfully collected by the Gringer were returned. The town was also financed by the royal capital, so everything was fine. The guy smiled, and the girl understood. She said that she would use his money with gratitude. Shirley noticed that it was quite a long time now and called the lawyer with her, but the guy didn't understand where they were going. Shirley lowered her gaze and said they were going to the dead for a funeral. As the head of the guild, Shirley told everyone that the invasion of magical beasts had taken many lives, and they would never forget this grief and would never stop. And they all do it for the sacrifices they have made. All the people gathered at the graves of the dead, and the protagonist prayed with everyone. When the funeral was over, the friends walked the lawyer to the exit, and the guy said he had to go. Greaves didn't believe it was really a breakup, but if anything happened, they could always call him by that clock. Greaves thought of something and took his friend aside. He admitted that he was actually going to confess everything to Faris, and the hero was surprised. He was just thinking about the fact that in this turmoil their distance had decreased, and when they would get married he would want his friend to bless them as well. Juris understood and said he would look forward to it. Meanwhile, the girls did not understand what they were whispering about. The friends turned around and laughed and said it was okay. Bagging also came out to escort the jurist out. The hero apologized to the man for causing him a lot of trouble, but Bagging asked him not to joke around like that. Bagging approached the guy and told him that he needed to apologize to him. The man bowed to the jurist and apologized to him in public. The elf in his group did not understand what had happened to the Baggin and why their leader was bowing. Knowing of his true power, the Baggin didn't tell anyone about it. He wanted to attract him to the blue dragon scales, and because of this he could not reverse the decision to banish him. And he ended up with this result. The man believed that the losses due to the invasion of magical animals were only his fault, and if he hadn't been so foolishly conceited, none of this would have happened. But the jurist put his hand on Bagan's shoulder and said that it didn't, as he knew the hero's way of fighting involved his friends, which was why he was comfortable fighting alone. And who didn't tell about it? It was him. The hunters helped each other, but the hero had to do everything alone, so he decided to leave. He thought he was being selfish by making others think the same way. They survived this invasion because they didn't give up. But the Bagan was not guilty of anything, and he had nothing to thank the jurist for either. Bagan took the hero's hands and apologized to him and also to everyone else. And when they were all clear, the hero said goodbye to the boys and said that they would meet some other time. Shirley called out to the jurist and said that this town was henceforth his native place, and he could return here at any time. The hero smiled and remembered something, then called out to Jirius. He asked his buddy to be sure to call him to the wedding, and Jirius blushed. Forrest didn't understand what he meant, and Greaves shouted to the lawyer that he was a moron for revealing his secret to everyone. Guy noticed Greaves running toward him and told Cisco that it was time for them to run away. Juris and Cobalt used acceleration magic, and all Greaves had to do was curse at them. Meanwhile, underwater, the man greeted the Sea King, whom they had not seen for a long time. The Sea King recognized the Dungeon Master, and the masked man said that he now had that name. The Sea King laughed and said that was a very low ranking for him. The Dungeon Master came here to warn the king. The Sea King should be careful of a man that looked a lot like him. That's all he had to say, and after his warning, the Dungeon Master disappeared. The Sea King couldn't understand who he thought he was or what he was trying to accomplish. Besides, he was the Sea King Leviathan, the true champion who rules these seas. Cobalt lay down sadly on the ground and stuck out his tongue, telling his mentor that he was hungry. Meanwhile, the hero was trying to catch a fish with a fishing rod and didn't understand how this happened. 3 hours ago, the guy was happy that they had finally arrived. It was in Nanta City, and the guy suggested that the Cobalt hurry up and find the Hunters Guild, get registered, and go eat. When the heroes entered the city, Soshi smelled a strange odor. Juris explained to him that this was the smell of seawater, and he would soon get used to it. The hero noticed that a couple of men were looking at him, and Soshi asked his mentor to listen. The guy asked the Soshi not to talk loudly while they were here, because if they found out he was a kobold, they would be in trouble. The heroes reached the market, and the guy thought it was getting more and more interesting here. Juris offered to watch the cobalt as the abundant seafood was spread out here. But Soshi remarked that they weren't really that abundant, and the hero agreed with him. The boy turned to the vendor and asked if it was possible to eat sashimi in this town. But the vendor replied that he was a stranger, and to strangers, they did not sell fish. The guy and the Soshi looked at each other in surprise. But the hero did not understand how this was possible, for he had heard that rich gifts of the sea were sold here. But the answer was only negative. In that case, the jurist decided to inquire where the Hunters Guild was located, and the seller silently pointed his finger at him. Lastly, the salesman said that he was unlucky to come to the city at such a time. The hero didn't know what he meant, but headed to the guild. As soon as the jurist went inside, he caught a couple of disgruntled male stares. The hero felt embarrassed, and as he passed by he said hello to everyone. Juris went to the registration desk, where no one was there, and apologized. But then he lowered his gaze and saw a wagging cattail below. The girl had placed a small crate for herself in order to stand on it. It was a pretty girl with cat ears and tail that stared at the guy attentively. The hero apologized and would like to call the secretary, but the girl said that she was the secretary of this guild as well. In that case, the guy assumed that her name was Ninya, and the girl was surprised that he knew her name. Juris held out a letter of recommendation to her, and the girl realized that he was a hunter in F rank. Her attention was also caught by the kobold who sat next to the hero. At first she didn't realize where the stench was coming from, but seeing the dog made her tail stand up. It immediately asked to be kicked outside, and one of the guys was about to fulfill that request. But the jurist asked them to stop, for he was his companion and would not do anything bad to them. Ninya shouted that she couldn't stand dogs, especially the stench from them and the silly face with which they suck up to people. She ordered him out of here promptly, and the boy apologized to the Shisho. He wished the Cobalt would wait for him outside, and the Shisho barked in agreement. Ninya looked at the letters again and thought about the tiresome man they had gotten. She assumed he should have been kicked out right away, but then she noticed the second letter. The girl was surprised that it was a letter from Shirley. She took another look at the guy. The hero would want to know about registration, and the girl grudgingly said she would register him. The guy assumed that this was handled by the Gilmas, but he was always busy with his work, so the ninja took care of these matters. And in doing so, she didn't have to report every F rank to the Nitian. Juris didn't know who it was, and the girl explained that Nitian was the master here and said that the guy had come at a bad time. The thing was that there was not much work in the Nanta right now. The hero didn't understand why. After all, hunting goblins was also good. The girl replied that there were no magical beasts that were found on land right now. There was the job of escorting the fishermen, and the main task was to exterminate the sea magic beasts. And according to the jurist, there was no problem here. Ninja also wanted to clarify that they didn't have fish right now, so there was hardly any work for hunters either, which surprised the jurist. Recently the fish had started to disappear and all that could be caught were small fish on the seashore. The hero was curious to know the reason, but the ninja irritably said she didn't know that. Anyway, if they went fishing now, they wouldn't catch any fish because they might be attacked by magical beasts. The hero thought they were joking, because he had already dreamed of eating sashimi. Now all the fish were dried and taken away so that the city wouldn't eat them all. Because of this, the town's finances were on fire. While the guy was in despair, Ninja thought about whether he was really an incredible hunter, just like Shirley had said about him. She realized that Shirley wasn't the type to lie, but she still had doubts about him. Looking at his sad face, she did not believe it. The girl explained once again that she had no chance to give him something to eat and suggested going to another town. But the hero exclaimed that he couldn't leave here without trying sashimi and asked if there was any way to eat fish. But if they wanted to eat fish so badly, they would have to catch it themselves. Ninja said that if they cast a rod, he might be able to catch a small fish. One of the co-guilders lent the guy his fishing rod and asked him to return it after fishing, and thus the hero found himself fishing. Juris still couldn't believe that he couldn't even eat fried fish, let alone sashimi, and now he had to do everything on his own. The kobold suggested that the host use his magic and slam on the water to catch a bunch of fish at once, but the hero didn't want them to be kicked out of town for that. So she sadly laid down on the ground and said he was hungry, and the guy held out a piece of beef to him. It was all he could give him. The hero said that as soon as he caught some fish, they would fry it with salt. However, the guy wasn't sure if they should have been so relaxed right now. The dungeon master was quite similar to him, and the hero wanted to find him and question him about everything, although he didn't know where he had gone. He had said earlier that whatever he did, people wouldn't accept him, and they were demons, even less so. Juris didn't understand why the demon was so much like him. Besides, he apparently knew him. The hero could agree that he was indeed bad with humans, but not as bad as the demon said he was. Moreover, he wondered why exactly the demon said that, since they hated them. It didn't matter who, they hated all humans. In that case, the guy didn't understand why it was like him and assumed that they were somehow related. He even thought about the fact that they might have turned out to be brothers who were separated. But that was impossible. After all, he was a demon after all. Juris assumed that his village was really hiding something from him. And even if they were, it was too late to talk about it. So she shouted to his master that he had a bite, and the guy came to his senses. The guy was excited and thought about the fact that they could finally eat the fish and noticed that it was quite heavy. The guy was actively reeling in the rod and said it was their precious fish, and something big jumped out from under the water. The hero was surprised to see a shark-shaped man in front of him and asked the kobold what it was. At the sight of this creature, the ninja could not understand what it meant, and the hero smiled. The creature introduced himself as a warrior, a fish man named Fuka, and said that the god of fishes has given strength to all those who live on land. Ninja asked who the fish god was, and Fuka asked to be called Mr. Fish God and no other way. The girl thought it was all rather tedious and asked for details. The fact was that the sea was now in danger of being invaded by a sea king. It was upsetting, but they were outnumbered and couldn't do anything about it. So the fish god sent him on a mission for the sake of asking for their help. The girl thought he was talking about the King of the Sea, and Fuka replied that was the name of the King of the Sea magical beasts. For a long time he had been hiding somewhere, fearing the power of the god of fishes, but once the god's power was weakened, the magical beasts invaded their underwater castle. Ninja didn't understand why the fish god lord's power had weakened, and Fuka said that she was asking a lot of questions. In any case, they were in danger now and they had to be quiet and help them. Ninja was furious that this was how he was asking for favors from the people. Besides, they didn't know what they would get in return for their help. Fuka recalled that the fish had been pretty hard to catch lately, and it was all the fault of the Sea King's army hanging around near their underwater castle. All the fish had completely rushed away from here. About the fish, he said right, and this situation was causing them a lot of trouble. In that case, Fuka thought that they would be able to help them, but Ninja wasn't sure about that. The fact was that they could not enter the water because land creatures could not breathe underwater. The shark was shocked and the ninja got angry again, saying that it was natural, for they were not fish for whom water was their whole life. Fuka thought about the fact that there was nothing that could be done and the Nina wished she could do something about it, but she couldn't. While they were thinking, the hero raised his hand and said that there was something he could do. He was immediately jumped on with questions, and the guy said he could use breathing magic underwater, even though it would be his first time diving into water, but he thought it would work. However, Fuka thought about the fact that he would be going alone and wasn't sure if such a frail boy would be able to pull it off. But Ninya didn't know that herself. She said that he had only come to them today. At that time a girl came up to them and asked them why they were so worried. Ninya was surprised to see Nitian here and the guild leader suggested to just trust him. She walked up to the guy and verified that his name was Juris. The girl smiled, introduced herself and said that she had heard about him from the ninja. He was the brave man who had saved the city of Lioner. The boy was embarrassed and said that he had not done much and the Nigna did not understand how they could entrust the city to a man they did not know. But the girl reminded him that he had been recommended by Shirley. Besides, no one would be able to dive underwater but him, so there wasn't much choice. They wanted to know from Juris if his underwater breathing magic worked on others and the guy confirmed it. But only it would be hard for him to use magic again when he fights underwater. Therefore, the magic would only work for a maximum of 2 people. In that case, the guild leader said that the ninja would go along with him and the girl was terrified, not understanding why her. But in all likelihood, she couldn't trust a newcomer with an entire city. Besides, it would be a good chance to assess his true strength. In that case, the Nina thought that anyone could go in her place. Besides, the head knew that she couldn't swim. Ninya was right and they wanted to listen to Juris' ideas. The guy said he needed to think about it and suggested putting magic on the ship and sailing it. The head praised the good idea and said they would stop at the ship. Nina was horrified, not understanding why the head wanted her to go with him so badly. Fuka assumed they had made up their minds and they replied that Nina and Juris would go there. Lately the fish had completely disappeared and it was all because of problems with the Lord of the Fish God. Ni was worried and if things continued like this, the Lord would not be able to stand it. But if they could overthrow the Sea King, there was still hope, and the head hoped that their help would do something. Also, Ni trusted Fuka Ninya and hoped nothing would happen to her, and Fuka promised to keep an eye on her. The head assumed that since he was a fish warrior, she could trust him and Fuka thanked the head for the flattery. The old man offered the heroes one of the boats and hoped it would suit them. If anything, he could prepare a bigger and stronger boat. But the hero replied that it would be enough for 2. If it's bigger, it will stand out. Besides, the boat is protected by magic, so it's pretty sturdy. The guy climbed into the boat and pointed at the motor, asking what it was. The old man noticed that it was the first time he was getting on a boat. He told the lad that it was a magical outboard motor, and when a magic stone was inserted into it, it would turn on its axis, and the boat would float forward. It made sense to the hero. He thought it was convenient for it to be propelled by magical power. Foucault said that in that case, it would be better for him to steer the boat and the hero didn't mind. No sooner had Ninja entered the boat than she was horrified at the sight of the kobold, and thought of that dog also sailing with them. The hero smiled at the kobold and said that he could wait for him in the city, but the eyes of the Sosha were burning with impatience. Juris replied that he was right and it was impossible. Ninya sadly lowered her head and Fuka said they were moving out. Ni waved goodbye and thought of the brave man who saved the Lioner. The girl felt that this could be an opportunity to put the plan into action. The hero remarked that their shield was working fine, and so far everything was going right. Nina hoped so and constantly worried that the boat might have collapsed. But Juris asked her not to worry, because she could breathe underwater, so she was unlikely to drown. But this uncertainty frightened her, and the Fuka said that they would soon be approaching the Sea King's army. He also asked them not to make too much noise. The hero noticed that they were farther and farther from the sun, and it was quite unusual here under the water. Ninya was not thrilled to see such a carefree man and prayed that they would reach the underwater bell safely. But apparently they would not get there without trouble. The hero asked Foucault what was the matter, and the warrior replied that they had found them. It was quite dark here, so nothing could be seen, and Foucault asked to increase the speed of the boat. Ninja's hair stood on end at the sight of the huge fish. She didn't think there would be such huge fish hanging around their castle, and Foucault said he was swimming back. The hero said he would keep him and asked him to keep the boat moving. Foucault understood and the hero got out from under the shield. Nina noticed that the boat was speeding up, but the kobold was only worried about his master. The boy told the kobold that he would catch up with them and trusted him with the Nina. The dog replied that he understood everything, and the Nina was surprised that he could talk. Apparently, Juris underestimated the sea, for he did not think it would be so dark. Suddenly he felt movement behind him. Turning around, he saw the mouth of a huge fish in front of him. Foucault felt that someone was near, and Nigna was worried that the hero had rushed there alone. But the kobold said his master was strong and they certainly shouldn't have worried. No sooner had the Nina asked the kobold a question than Foucault told them that they had sailed. Finally, they reached the underwater castle. Fuka asked Ninja and Kobold to wait for him here until he found the Juris. But the lad was at his back and said he was here, thus scaring the warrior to death. Foucault was surprised that the hero was unharmed, and the Nina said she got worried when he rushed on alone. Foucault suggested that the Jurist had cleverly managed to escape from the enemy, but the hero replied that he had overpowered him. The warrior even doubted that he meant it. The lad explained that the fish had given him a surprise blow and swallowed him, but he had used water magic and cut him from inside his stomach. Ningya, though surprised, didn't give that appearance. But for now he was able to internalize the battle underwater, and the hero suggested that they move on. Fuka asked the boy to stop. He said he underestimated the guy who was a noble warrior since he went into the arms of danger for the sake of his buddies, and he deserved respect. The hero thought he hadn't done anything amazing, but thanked him for the praise. But now the ninja had a far more important question and wanted to know what was wrong with his dog. Vina heard him speaking in human language and thought about the fact that this was an unusual dog. Kobold apologized to his master and said he didn't do it on purpose. The hero stroked Soshi's head and understood him perfectly. There were many circumstances for this, and it was quite a long story. Foucault didn't understand why the Nina yelled, and the girl assumed that he heard him talking too. Foucault only assumed that he was a Zuero person. The hero petted the dog and said that his Soshi was the rarest beast man of all the dogs in this world. Therefore, in order not to stand out much, he presented himself as an ordinary dog. But the ninja had never heard of a beastman dog, so the hero said he was just rare. The girl still didn't believe him, but Fuka suggested leaving it alone, for the fish god was waiting for them, and they had to hurry. While the heroes were walking through the corridors of the castle, Juris thanked Fuko and said that they had good security. But it was still unclear to the boy why Fuko was accompanied by guards. They were led into a huge hall that was surprising in its size. The hero would like to know from the girl what the god of fishes was, but the ninja admitted that she herself met him for the first time. Apparently, he was the head of all the fishes. Juris had already visualized in his head the image of him being disgruntled because he wanted to eat sashimi, and was going to eat their people. He wouldn't be surprised if they gave him a bloodbath for that. Fuka bowed and addressed the great goddess of fish. As she commanded, he brought back the land creatures. A female voice said he had returned safely, and thanked the warrior. The lad did not understand where this female voice came from and raised his head at the same time as the ninja. The sea goddess was right in front of them, and she was quite huge. Fuka was shocked at their rudeness, but the goddess only smiled. The girl said that the land creatures had come to see her, the queen of the underwater castle. So she kindly asked them to call her the fish goddess. Ninja was pleased to meet the fish goddess, and she introduced herself as a resident of the city of Nanth. She also introduced the hunter Juris who was near her. The goddess thanked them for being able to come here. Cobalt wanted to speak to his mentor, but the hero covered his mouth to prevent anyone from hearing him. The fish goddess smiled at the Juris again, and the Fuka asked the lady for an apology. The fact was that he had been able to acquire the help of the Drylanders in Nanta, but bringing more than 3 was not possible. It was all to blame that the landmen did not know how to breathe underwater. And if it wasn't for the jurist who used the magic of breathing underwater, he wouldn't have been able to bring even that amount of help. The hero was surprised that the fish goddess apparently did not know this either. However, unfortunately, it seemed to Fuke that with such a small amount of strength, they wouldn't be able to resist the Sea King and had to think of something. But the goddess didn't see this as a big deal. After all, she had asked for help from the landers in the first place, not for the sake of military strength. The goddess suggested that the land creatures start by explaining their entire given situation to them. This underwater castle was now being attacked by an enemy calling himself the King of the Sea. The goddess was protecting the castle with a magical barrier, but it had been a month since the war had started and her powers were already at their limit. The heroes were surprised that she held up this huge magical barrier for a month. But as it turned out, it wasn't the only one, and they must have already noticed the strange atmosphere inside the castle. It is also a kind of defense created by Miz a couple of months ago. Ningya was surprised by such strength, and the jurist agreed with her. Naturally, in order to maintain the defense, the magic power would start to be consumed. and an ordinary person could destroy an individual-sized barrier in less than an hour. This only meant that they had every second counted, and the goddess was glad they realized that. The situation was clear. It meant that they just had to defeat the Sea King. But the goddess confessed that that wasn't really what she wanted to ask them to do and asked the siren to come to her. The siren turned out to be a little girl who was hiding from the heroes. Meanwhile, the Sea King realized that the fish goddess had played a trick on them, but he didn't think that one or two people would change the whole situation. He knew that her barrier was at its limit, which meant that they would immediately attack and destroy the underwater castle with everyone there. Nina stared in surprise at the girl who was apparently called Siren. The goddess wanted them to send her safely back to her homeland. Juris didn't understand what she meant. As it turned out, the soldiers had found the siren on the beach at the mouth of the river 2 months ago, and she had been in their custody the whole time. But she could not live here in the sea, since her homeland is in the river. The hero did not understand why she could not live in the sea, for she was also a fish person. If explained in a simpler way, she was a freshwater fish, and the guy understood everything. Therefore, it was impossible for her to live in such an atmosphere. Siren was sick and was to be returned by them to land as soon as she recovered. But the Sea King's invasion started at the wrong time. Because of this, it would be impossible to take her to safety. So the goddess asked them to take her back to her homeland so that she would return safely. But the jurists did not understand how they would deal with the king of the sea. The goddess declared that she would deal with him herself, and the Fuka asked the lady to wait. He reminded her that she didn't even have the strength to stand up and asked her to entrust the Sea King to them. Even so, the goddess had to guard the place and protect them as it was her duty. The goddess clutched her head with fatigue, and the siren begged her forgiveness, for she thought it was all her fault. But the goddess smiled and said that it wasn't, and bringing her here was personally her will. And now it was natural that she should be held responsible for her. Nina wondered at the jurists what they could do, and the lad wondered. He figured that fighting the king certainly wouldn't cause him any problems, and they would figure something out. Except, he didn't want to break the fish goddess's firm resolve. Cobalt reminded his master of the medicine that made everyone awake, and it was possible to give this medicine to the fish goddess. But the hero said that they had used it up when there was an invasion of magical beasts, and it would take several days to create it. In that case, so she suggested using food. Cobalt told the goddess that it would be better for her to eat her master's food, for it could restore her strength and vigor. So she explained that it was because of his food that he learned to talk, and that the fact that they were able to defeat the griffin was all because of the master's food. Juris turned to Falk and asked him to listen. He would like to ask permission to use their kitchen, and the Fuka and goddess looked over at each other. Suddenly a violent shaking began, from which the ninja could hardly stand on his feet. The Sea King laughed and said that the goddess barrier had weakened and they were about to enter it with the whole army. The Sea King wanted to eat the fish goddess with all her subordinates and couldn't wait for that to happen.